This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1071, a conversation with Andrew Pepoy.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1071. It's a conversation with Andrew Pepoy. You might recognize the name Andrew Pepoy, I hope, because you just listened to episode 1068 a few weeks ago, which was his first appearance on the podcast. Now, he is a two-time guest as we talk about his career basically from the year 2000 to now. We talk about all the different projects he's been able to ink over that period, his association with Fables, and many other things. I think this is a really fun conversation, and I hope that you will enjoy listening to it, and it was always great having Andrew on the show because he was just such a fun guest and had a lot of interesting things to say. Looking forward to upcoming episodes. We're going to have a Book of the Month Club coming out 1 week early. We like to do it the last weekend of the month, but we wanted to do it more of a Christmas theme. So we're talking about 4 or 5 individual issues that are going to be more Christmas oriented. So that'll be coming out on the 21st of December, hopefully. That's the plan. This episode's going out a little bit later than it was supposed to, but hopefully the next one will be out on the 21st. The episode after that, at least at the moment, will be a conversation with Eric Anthony of the Cave of Solitude and Omniverse Comics Guide podcast and website. So that'll be really fun. Eric has been a friend of the show for a long time. I, for some reason, keep not having him on this show, but I have done many episodes of his show in the past, so it'd be nice to have him on my show. The week after that, we're hoping on this January 4th, we'll have a conversation with Chaz Bauer, who recently wrote a book called Stanley Lied. The week after that, January the 11th, we should be having Dan Gavosden back from the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. He has not been on for a long time. It's not since episode 1000, which came out August 12th, 2022. So it's been about a year and a half. So it'd be nice to have Dan back on the show. Not sure what we're going to be doing January the 18th yet, but January 25th, we're going to have another Book of the Month Club. I don't know what that's going to be about. I don't know if we have enough time for the participants to read the Exiled and Lost Years stuff to talk about the Clone Saga. So that might end up being something that we kind of do on the fly. But those are some of the upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening to this podcast. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com. You can rate us on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time after this episode. I keep doing this as if we're done, but we're not done. Let's jump right into the conversation with Andrew Pepoy. Enjoy. Andrew, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to have you back on for part 2, since last time we got all the way up to, the turn of the century. We're up to 2000. So let's jump right in. We're right when the 2000s are actually just before 2000 even starts. One thing I don't think we actually talked about last time, but I'm very curious about as an experience is what it was like to come onto a project like X-Men Children of the Atom, where you're inking over Steve Rude.
Well, it's Steve Rude, who certainly as a kid I was, a huge fan of. He was suddenly, the phenomenon when I was, about 13, 14 years old. Because I did start buying Nexus with the first issue of the magazine-sized Nexus. So I was there from the beginning, it was fun to do. This is 20 some years on. I still think it's one of the better inking jobs I ever did, because I really got a chance to do a lot of interesting techniques and different kinds of brushwork that I don't normally get to do with a lot of people. But I knew that's the kind of thing Steve was looking for, was dry brush and split brush, things like that. In some ways it was sort of perfect timing for me. I had just come off a project at Dark Horse, Aliens Xenogenesis, where I'd been inking Dave Ross. And the editor had said to me, it's like, why don't you try some of this other stuff and, try these other things with your inks, which really helped, sort of propel me to the next level of where I could be as an inker. And I think that was what allowed me to do the sample that got me the job inking Steve on Children of the Atom.
Now, I guess I have a question about that then. So when you say, like, when you're working on a sample, like, did you get a call from Mark Powers being like, Steve Rude's going to be working on, a Children of the Atom book? What would you do with this? Or, like, what was that kind of process like in bringing you on board?
I wish I could remember.
It is 24 years ago, to be fair, or 25 years ago.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what the process was. Mark and I have always gotten along well. I've worked with Mark a number of times over the years on various different projects. So, it was nice that Mark thought of me for this, and so I'm sure Mark was great to work with, and I just don't quite remember exactly. I just remember, Steve being very exacting in what he wanted, and I was very happy in that. I apparently did give him what he wanted, because, he would, this is I guess some people had email in those days. Steve didn't, and Steve would fax me, and he would with occasional comments or notes, and most of them were like very complimentary, and so that was a, really nice thing, getting to work with Steve and having him like what I was doing.
How much, but besides getting these faxes from Steve, was there a lot of back and forth? Like, did you ever actually talk to him on the phone about the work? Or I'm always curious, because obviously, as you've said, and you ink so many different people, it's so many different ways that the collaboration can go down. There's those where you never talk with the penciler at all. You just kind of come in and you do your thing. There's others where there's a lot more discussion. So I'm just curious, which extreme this falls more under.
I'm pretty sure Steve and I had several conversations, but again, unlike part one of this interview where I could remember all the details, on this one I don't remember exactly. I know that like I said, I know I still have a few of the complimentary faxes Steve sent me stuck somewhere in some box, but I'm sure we had some phone calls. Because I do remember at least one phone call with Steve at one point, but I don't remember. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't remember exactly.
That's okay.
Yeah, I wish Steve had been able to continue on the project. It's like that was it's like, I know Steve has sometimes fallen behind on things, but this was not Steve's fault on this one. So. Just for the record, there, this one was not Steve's fault.
What was it like to continue working on a project like that after, Steve isn't doing the pages anymore, but you're still, again, we talked about this before, that you're kind of that visual consistency and that glue. Was that stressful for you?
Well, at first I wasn't on the project anymore, which was quite, something I was very not happy about. They replaced Steve with Paul Smith, who wanted to ink his own pencils, and in the end, he wasn't able to keep up. I mean, going back to the original problem with the series is it launched too quickly, and there just wasn't enough lead time for anybody, and so Steve fell behind. Because he didn't have the proper lead time to begin with, and Paul was given even less lead time, and so Paul inked what he could on it, and then I ended up doing finishes over a handful of pages of Paul's layouts, and then I think, if I remember right, I think Michael Ryan penciled the last part of the issue, which I then inked, and at that point we ended up with Essid Ribic doing pencils, and they were very, loose pencils, and Paul was a decent continuation of Steve, and nothing against Essid's stuff, but it just didn't. It was completely different from the feel that Steve or Paul would have brought to the project to begin with, and so that was an interesting trying to figure out how do I make this work and blend at all, So I do remember that being a bit of a struggle.
Interesting. Now, in and around this time, obviously you're you're pretty common around the X office because obviously you had your long collaboration. So working on issues of Cable. Am I back?
Yes, you seem to be back. I lost you for a second.
Okay. When you're working on a book so you're in the X office, and then you're working on, books like Mutant X, Cable, etc. I'm curious what the collaboration was like with Michael Ryan, who you already mentioned, because obviously you did a fair bit of his covers on Cable and a bunch of the interiors as well. So I'm curious what it was like to work on Cable, because that was an interesting book at that time, very much going through an artistic progression for the character that was very different from where the character had started at the beginning of the decade. So I'm curious how you felt, kind of bringing your inks to a project like that, because it was a very slick-looking book.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember enjoying working on it. One nice thing about it is that it was the brief period where Bob Weinberg, science fiction novelist, was the writer, and I'd known Bob to some extent since I was 14 years old. First time I met Bob, and I would buy things from him at the Chicago Comic-Con because he would also set up as a vendor at these shows, and so, I actually knew Bob, and so it was sort of nice getting to work with him and seeing he certainly had as you said, had a different take on Cable and what to do with it than what had been done before. And so I was happy to be on it with that. I remember Michael's pencils were beautiful, but took forever to ink to make them look as good as they could be. And my problem at the time was the other thing I was doing right at around that same time, like right after Children of the Atom, and just as I was getting onto Cable, was I was drawing the Little Orphan Annie newspaper strip. I don't know if you knew about that.
We talked about that actually last time.
Did we? Okay, I don't remember, but anyway, and
that's okay. It was a month ago.
Yeah. And with the time that Little Orphan Annie was taking, I loved inking Cable. I had I remember chatting with Michael a fair number of times and having good chats with him, but unfortunately, it took so long to ink that I couldn't keep up, and so that's why I ended up leaving the book, was with the other commitments that I had to the strip and all. I was not able to ink fast enough to get it done. But I do remember enjoying it, and I remember, inking Michael on that. And I think Michael and I may have worked together at least one time after that. It's ringing a bell in the back of my head. But again, like we keep saying, we're talking over 20 years ago.
So obviously you're at this point no stranger to working, both sides of the aisle, so to speak, in terms of, kind of going where the work was, cultivating these relationships with editors, various different publishing companies. I'm curious, you start drawing with inking with more regularity, the Robin comics. So I'm very curious kind of how that came about and what it was like to kind of work over artists like Pete Woods.
Well, I had a nice time doing it. I think Pete asked for me because we had done some Deadpool together a few years earlier, and I guess he had liked that and asked editor Matt Idelson to ask me about inking Robin, and so that's how I ended up doing Robin for 3 years. I always had a nice time doing it. I think it was one of the last books to still be lettered on the boards. I do remember that because at that point everything was switching to digital lettering, and I still like lettering on the boards, and that, having lettering on the boards, and that was one of the last books to still be lettered that way. We had Willie Schubert, one of a great letterer who unfortunately seems to be too little remembered today, was letterer on that, and so I also remember having great chats with Willie because we were always trying to, the book, as with almost every comic book, it's always running down to the wire. And so I had many phone calls with Willie, just checking on where, how pages were looking and when to expect them, because I also was, as I said, juggling Little Orphan Annie and other stuff at the time. And so I was always trying to keep on top of exactly what's coming and when. And so I also remember having great chats with Willie Schubert for the years I was working on that as well.
That's awesome. When you're working with someone like Pete for that long, what kind of artistic shorthand did you guys start to develop with each other? And again, like, because you were working with each other, for such a prolonged period, was there more collaboration? Did you guys have more discussion, or did at times he go a little bit looser because he knew you could really, bring your game to kind of make it, fill it in? Like, I'm curious, what are the benefits of working with someone that consistently for that long?
Well, I mean, for me, I like working with people consistently because it does, I don't have to reinvent how I'm inking someone each time. Like on a lot of jobs, I think we may have talked about last time, I'm a bit of a chameleon. My view of inking is to make the pencils look as good as they can in a style that best fits them. So I will adapt my inks to their pencils. But once I have figured out what works with their pencils, it's nice to be able to just have a nice long run with someone where you don't have to always be thinking about how do I approach this or how do I approach that. You've probably already done something like that before, and you sort of just naturally know how to do it, and it becomes much, much easier.
It does seem like during this period, like you were still getting like, the kind of random gig that DC would be like, okay, we need you to ink this, but you also had the consistency of the main book. Is that kind of the ideal situation for you, where you're able to still kind of flex muscles and try different things and over different artists, but at the same time you have this kind of home base to go back to?
I mean, there's some fun to the novelty of the different pencilers, but I mean, to be honest, what was going to be coming up in a few years was my sort of, in some ways, my favorite period of inking, where I spent about 10 years inking the same pencilers. Like a few years down the road from what we're talking about. So we can always skip backwards in a minute, but I'll just say, down the road when I was doing like Fables and, various, Fables and its various spin-offs and the various Simpsons books, I was working with, the same handful of pencilers, and had reasonably steady work for about 10 years there. So that in many ways that was for me the best period of inking. If that makes any sense,
because you have, once you have consistent collaborators and a consistent type of world, it makes sense that they would be, the most comfortable and easiest, kind of way to develop yourself as well.
Right. And, just to be putting a, utilitarian aspect on it, it's like, I had steady work, and so therefore I knew I could pay my mortgage every month, so.
Yeah, there is that too. I mean, it's where art meets commerce, right?
Right. I mean, as much as we all love the artistic side of it, and there is the economic side of it, where you have to make sure there's money coming in and you're paying your bills. And yes, bouncing around could be great, but because it did lead to a lot of fun, and some novelty and some things like that. But having work for a long period of time is also in some ways like there's less stress and uncertainty to it. So yes, I do enjoy having steady work, but I mean, I guess in some ways, there's always been, I've often had like 2/3 of, like, even in that period though, I would have about 2/3 of my schedule filled with the steady work of Simpsons and Fables. And then, there'd be little other odd jobs that would pop up along the way. And so, yeah, I still never got away from having the few little odd jobs. I just had fewer of the little odd jobs. And I mean, another part of it was, I think, we may have talked about editor Jason Liebig last time, and his advice to me to try to be, try to focus on being the guy they call when they want something done well, not when they want something done quickly. And did we talk about that?
Oh, absolutely, we did, yeah.
Yeah, we did, yeah. And so I was trying to not take as many of those little extra jobs that I had to, knock out over a weekend or something like that, because I wanted to be doing better quality work.
I want to jump ahead for a minute to 2005, a book that I always really appreciated and enjoyed when it was coming out, which I feel like it just kind of went under the radar, unfortunately, but it was really deserving of more than that, which was Freshman over at Image Comics, or I guess technically Top Cow. And obviously you're working with Leonard Kirk, who's not a name that you haven't been associated with. You've worked with a lot with Leonard. I'm curious, when did you get brought into a book like that, or how early in the process did you get paired with Leonard for that?
I think it was pretty early. I mean, Leonard and I had known each other for a number of years and had been talking about working together for years and years and years. And just never, and talking about maybe things at DC or something like that just never seemed to, quite come together. But yeah, he ended up doing some work for Top Cow, doing a couple issues of Witchblade, and brought me in for those, and that went well. And so I guess, he asked for me when this freshman thing came along, and I got brought in pretty early in on that. And that was, I mean, Leonard's pencils are gorgeous. And Leonard is just one of the nicest guys in the business. So and even when we, I do remember Leonard and I having many phone calls, whether we were working together on Freshmen or whether we were, or even when we weren't, for the years before that. He's always just a great guy to chat with, and we'd have long phone calls, which could get quite expensive at the time because he lives in Canada. But yeah, I mean, he's just a great guy, and his pencils are gorgeous. So, I mean, it was just a great project to be on. And I mean, it was just a quirky sort of project. And I do like when something's a little different and interesting. I mean, you've read it, obviously. It's not your standard superhero story. And I mean, I also remember at the time, Top Cut was really doing a big push for it, and we ended up doing a signing right when number one came out with Seth Green and Hugh Serbikoff, who were writing it, and on top, and everyone was so nice. Seth was so nice, everyone was great. I mean, it's just like when everyone's nice and everyone's getting along, and it's just a really nice experience. Yeah, we that going to do that signing was the first time that I'd actually had any direct interaction with Seth, and we met, and he was really nice. I didn't want to seem too fanboyish, but I brought my Greg the Bunny DVD for him to sign because I had loved his very short-lived Greg the Bunny sitcom, and he signed it for me. And while we were doing the signing, the show's creator and a couple of the voice actors who had done the puppets happened to stop by, and Seth was just like, "Hey guys, you got to sign Andrew's DVD," And
that's awesome.
Yeah, he was just great. And, and like I said, so that, I have nothing but fond memories of working on Freshmen because like I said, starting out with Leonard's, pencils and just Leonard and then Seth and Hugh, Hugh and I still swap messages, the occasional message. And it was a great experience. And it was just, a fun, quirky book. And actually I managed to find, at a recent convention, a hardcover edition of it that I didn't know existed, and was able to pick it up for myself. So I was like, saw this sticking out of a box, and it's like, what's this? And was able to buy my own book. So
that's awesome. I don't think I knew it got a hardcover. I know it got softcover. I know I have the singles of that, both Freshman 1 and Freshman 2, and I don't know if I ever got the second trade somehow, but I know I had the first, but I didn't know it ever got a hardcover.
Yeah, apparently it did. I didn't know either. And, so yeah, it was sticking out of a box, and I should correct myself. I said, I got to buy a copy. It's like when the dealer realized I was buying it because I did it and didn't, had never even seen it. He was like, "Oh, here, just have it." And it's, which is one of those nice occasional perks of being in the business, and which was very nice of him. Like I tried to pay him and he was like, no. So that was very nice of the guy. But yeah.
Brought up obviously.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah. So I did the first series, but unfortunately Leonard was not available to do the second, and so they got a different artist for the second series. So I was not involved after that. Which is too bad. Yes, but I ran into Seth again at another convention, like the next year or year after that, and I was just sort of, he was doing a signing, and I was like just sort of walking by his table, and it was like, oh, wish there was a way to say hey to him, but there, a big mob, and he looks up and he sees me, and he just like jumps over his table and jumps over the security line. He's like, "Hey, Andrew," comes up, gives me this big hug. And the security people were like, "Hey, Seth, you can't do that. You can't do that."
That's wonderful.
But yeah, or one of my other favorite moments of that is, again, right after that signing that we did, that first signing we did with, where I first met Seth and Hugh and all that. Seth, Hugh, Leonard, and I got whisked off to the celebrity green room at San Diego Comic-Con there. It's like as a regular old comic book artist, I never knew there were back passages and things like that. Security hustled us through little back passages to get us up to the, celebrity green room. And I know there were other celebrities at the con, but there was actually nobody else in there except for us at the time when they took us in. And we were sitting around talking, and I remember Seth and Leonard talking about how you tell the difference between the first and second run of like the 1975 Mego action figures by the joint manufacturer. So he was just as much of a geek as everybody else at that convention. Awesome. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, you did mention obviously your long association with Fables. I'm curious how that came about and what that was like, because obviously you weren't doing every issue, but you did have a lot of issues that you did work on. So I'm curious, one, how you got involved and kind of brought into the kind of the rotation, so to speak, and then how you kind of managed that kind of workload, because it wasn't always every issue, but there was issues where you were doing a lot of the pages and then you'd be doing maybe just a couple pages here and there, and then it was more. So I'm curious how that ebbed and flowed.
Well, I mean, Fables was Steve Lealoa's book. And always he was, it was his to do if he could do it and had the time to do it. How I got involved was, like I had previously worked with Bill and Shelley on Sandman the Thessaliad, this spin-off miniseries that Bill had written and Sean McManus had penciled, and so I had inked Sean on that miniseries. So that's when I first got to work with Shelley, and Shelley got me some other work on a different editor's Vertigo book after that. So that's how I sort of got into Vertigo and got associated with some of that stuff. And like I think I may have mentioned in the last segment, I'd known Bill to in some extent since I was 14 years old. And he'd even spoken to me about working on like a Fables fill-in issue or something, or drawing an issue at some point before any of this happened. But I was at San Diego, and again, mid-2000s. I can't remember exactly what year it was. What do you happen from your notes to know what year Jack of Fables #1 came out?
Oh shoot, I did have that, and now I don't have it at the moment.
Okay, well, the year before whenever Jack of Fables #1 came out, so somewhere around 2006 or 7 or something like that. I ran into penciler Tony Akins at San Diego. Now, I've known Tony since I was in college. He had been working at First Comics, and we set up at these little shows here in Chicago while I was still in college trying to break into comics. So I've known Tony going back way back when. And I hadn't seen Tony in years, and so it was nice to run into him. We were just chatting, and he's like, I'm doing this thing at DC, and you should try out for being the inker. So Tony sent me some JPEGs of the stuff, which was a little hard to work from because but that's the best Tony had. So I remember at the time thinking, I hope I can do a good enough job with this. And I did the sample, and sort of on my own without Shelley saying do a sample. I just sort of did the sample and sent it in. And Shelley later told me that she said she opened the box and pulled out the pages, and as soon as she saw the pages, there wasn't anyone else she could give the project to, which was a nice compliment. That she liked him so much that she immediately, thought she had to, that it's like, nope, it was mine. So that's how I ended up on Jack of Fables. So that was my book. So Fables was Steve's book. And fine. And so I was working along on Jack, but they needed some help. Things were often down to the, as I said, things were often down to the wire on a monthly book, and things were often down to the wire on Fables, as happens on almost every project. And so they needed some help. And so one day they called me and they're like, "Hey, Andrew, can you ink a few pages of Fables?" And so, I remember I ended up on the phone with Mark Buckingham and his wife, who were living in Spain at the time, because it was so late that we didn't have time for them to FedEx me pages. And Bucky didn't own a scanner. And I had to talk him through how to get scans at some local copy shop and emailed them to me, in pieces, because he also couldn't scan at 11 by 17. So he was scanning in pieces. And I was then having to Photoshop them together and hoped I lined things up well enough, because the scans never quite lined up exactly right either when I would try to put them together. And so I did that. And so I sort of, this is going to sound conceited, but it's kind of came in and helped save the day on that issue, which they appreciated. And as more issues in the coming months were running down to the wire, they would call me in. And so I was doing Jack, but I would come in and do some Fables here and there. And, everybody seemed happy with what I was doing with him. So then, and I will mention that early on in my career, people would compare my inks to Steve Lealoa's. So I think we meshed really well. It was really hard for people to tell who did what, did what pages on those things unless they were marked. And so I think Steve and I blended really well with that. And so, everybody seemed happy with what I was doing, so that, say, when Steve decided to take 6 issues off to go work on a different project, they were fine having me come in and just be, sole inker for 6 issues in a row or however many I did. But, that's how I got involved, is, indirectly through doing Jack of Fables, which Tony Akins, helped bring me in on.
What was it like working, obviously both on Fables, but really on Jack? Because that book had a very specific style, but it was also very different than your standard superhero style. Not that was only all that you'd ever done, because you'd done so many different styles. And again, even throughout this time, you're still working on Simpsons comics. In the early 2000s, you were still working on Sonic. So you've done so many different things in so many different styles anyway. But what was it like to have such a pronounced long run on something that was so decidedly non-superheroic, but had its very own unique visual style?
I mean, for me, as long as the pencil, it's like, this is going to take some of the glamour out of it. For me, as long as the pencils are good, and the pencils were always good, whether it was Tony Akins or Russ Brown or whoever was working on Jack at that time, as long as the pencils were good, I was just having a good time. So I mean, it wasn't so much that it was an entirely different concept. I mean, I did appreciate doing that because I had been a fan of many of the Vertigo titles, but for me it was more just a chance to work with some good pencilers, and that's always my main goal as an inker, is to get to work with some good pencilers and do some good inks on them. And Tony and I, again, even though we had known each other at that point for probably close to 20 years, had never worked together. And fortunately we gelled very well, and we did well. And then again, when they brought Russ Brown in to help out on some issues, Russ and I worked real well together too. So I was just lucky. And I mean, yes, it helped that I actually enjoyed the concept and the project and what was going on and all that. But for me, that's what a lot of it comes down to, is whether it's The Simpsons, whether it's X-Men, whether it's Fables, if the pencils are good and I can have a fun time inking them, I'm happy.
Was it hard to see Jack of Fables end?
I mean, it's always sad to see almost any project end, because I mean, again, getting back down to what I said before, it's like you want to pay your bills, and so it's always that is the main reason I am sad to see most projects end. Is it's sort of like, oh, now I got to find another way to pay my bills. But yeah, I mean, but it was, I mean, fortunately, even when, unfortunately for Tony and Russ, when Jack ended, there wasn't a lot for them to do on Fables. For me, I was lucky in that there was still a fair amount for me to do on Fables. And I mean, for much of the run of Fables from that point on, I probably inked about half of the remaining run of Fables at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So there was still work for me, and I was still doing Simpsons at the time, and so things were good. And even if there were fewer pages of Fables related things to do, there Simpsons was sort of making up for it. And like
go ahead. I was just going to say, during that time, you're also kind of doing a few issues, I think, of Ferris as well. And so was it just kind of, you were kind of existing in this Fables world, so it kind of made sense for you to, be taking some of the jobs when they needed an inker, and you're like, well, you're already very accomplished at, the Fables world, and the understanding of what that looks like. Is that kind of how Ferris came about in terms of having a few issues there?
Yeah, I mean, Shelley, once told me she knew I could ink just about anybody that she tossed at me. I mean, we did find it. I won't mention what project it was. We did find one project where it was just sort of like I was not the right inker, but which does happen. Once in a while there's just something that comes along. It's not that there was anything wrong with the pencils. It's just I couldn't quite figure out how to really do what I considered a good job with it. And but she knew pretty much almost anything she threw at me I could do and adapt to, and I was reliable, and so that's how I ended up helping out on Ferris, or like when Steve said that's how I ended up helping out on like some of the Phil Jimenez stuff is just again I was there, reliable, and could help out with a few pages. But then, like with some of the Steve Sadowski stuff, Steve and I had worked together on a number of projects before that, and liked working with each other and liked each other as people. I mean, Steve and I, still to this day, we'll message each other occasionally, even if we haven't worked together in 10 years at this point. So I think, like you said, I was there, and when it came to like my main bit of Ferris stuff, it was over Steve, and she just knew, okay, he and Andrew and Steve know each other, they're friends, and they like working with each other. Let's team them up.
Similar idea then, when Fables, like the flagship book ends, was that again another kind of, besides the fact that there's a potentially reliable source of income that's going away as well, was that also just difficult to have that kind of going away from the atmosphere because you had been existing in a Fables adjacent world for a little while in terms of some of the work? Obviously in conjunction with Simpsons, of course, but I mean, here goes the Fables world, and it's kind of segueing out of being an ongoing concern. Was that difficult?
That was, because that we often described it as sort of a Fables family, and in many cases there was this little core group with a handful of other people who would come in and out as well, but we had this little Fables family, and so it was unfortunate to see that end. I greatly enjoyed inking Mark on Fables. His pencils were always fantastic. I may have mentioned this last time. Steve and I watched him drawing stuff one time, and just these gorgeous drawings just dripping effortlessly off his pencil. And Steve and I were looking at Bucky, just like, we hate you so much, because we don't really hate him, but you know what I mean. It's just sort of like, and he would always, Mark would always put up in the upper right corner of his pages how long it took him to draw them. And Steve and I, again, it's one of these things, Steve and I had known each other for years, even before this whole Fables thing. And, we used to have occasion, we used to chat on the phone from time to time anyway. But certainly while we were working on Fables, we would talk more, and we'd be working on his pages, and we'd see these, little notes up in the corner that it only took him 2 hours and 45 minutes to draw this page. And we're just like, how does he do this? It takes us longer to ink this stuff than it does for him to pencil it, So yeah, but the pencils were just always always wonderful. And so, yeah, it was sad to see that go. It was sad to see the rest of the Fables family go, with Jack going and all the other things. There were just so many good people involved in it. And so, yes, it was sad to see that go. And in many ways, it was especially sad to see it go because at that point, the inking work just kind of dried up at DC for me at that point. Everybody said, oh, as soon as Fables is done, we'll find you something to do. And unfortunately, that didn't really happen. Which in some ways, was a blessing in disguise because it really pushed me to sort of finally say, okay, well, I always planned on being, penciling and inking my own stuff. And so it gave me that push to really, really push my own pencils and inks at that point, which is what I was trying to do.
Mm.
And have we do these days. I still take on the occasional inking job when it comes along, but it doesn't happen very often anymore. And so almost everything I do these days, I'm penciling and inking because simultaneously things were quieting down. Like they were producing a lot fewer Simpsons comics, starting right around the same time as Fables ended. And even though the Simpsons line didn't completely end until 2018, in 2015 when Fables ended, Simpsons cut its output by a great amount, and so there was a loss of pretty much both those jobs at the same time. So yeah, so I had that as a real impetus to say, like, okay, well, inking's not happening a whole lot at the moment. Let's see what else we can do. And so yeah, I focused on penciling and inking and ended up doing the first project that really came together was Dinosaucers over at Lion Forge, which I ended up penciling and inking penciling and inking with Michael Uslan writing it.
And I don't think that was your first time working on something that Uslan had done, because didn't you do some of the Married Life with Archie, or maybe just a few pages here and there?
So it wasn't the first thing I'd ever penciled and inked, but I'm saying it was where that was.
I meant with Uslan. I mean, working on something with Michael Uslan, I meant.
No, Michael had written the original Archie marriage comics, but it was Paul Kupperberg that was writing the Life with Archie magazine, both the Betty and the Veronica halves. So yeah, so I had been the inker over Norm Brayfogle. Originally they asked me to do both halves, and I just didn't have time because I was also doing Fables and Simpsons, and they wanted me to do both the Betty and Veronica half because they had, I don't know if you've seen the magazine, they had one half of the magazine where it was like, what if Archie married Veronica, and the other half of the magazine was, what if Archie had married Betty, and so I couldn't do both, so I picked the Betty half, and was inking, like I said, inking Norm Brayfogle on it, but then Norm ended up leaving the book. And so, yes, I ended up penciling and inking, I think it was issue number 8 or something like that for Betty. And they actually wanted me to continue as penciler and inker on that. But then that's right when they decided, oh, let's bring back Katie Keene again. And there is actually a nearly finished Katie Keene miniseries that was produced at that time that has never seen print. But unfortunately, when they pulled the plug on that, I did not get to go back to Afterlife with Archie. So that I only, as far as Archie's stories go, I've only ever penciled and inked, that one issue of Afterlife that one issue, not of Afterlife, that one issue of Archie. So like I said, I did a bunch of covers, but as far as stories go, that was the only one I actually drew at Archie. So
I had a question about the Simpsons comics. I mean, obviously,
sure.
You had such a long, affiliation with them. Did you have a kind of a favorite? Like, you've worked on different Simpsons comics, and so not just like for the main Simpsons comics, there's a lot of others. Was there a particular one that was your favorite, or specific characters that you enjoyed kind of doing the inks over more for, or was it always just more fun? Like, it's such cartoony, it's more fun, it's got more of a sense of humor to it, and that obviously would have been different from a lot of your more, typical superhero work that you'd worked on in the past. I'm curious how you felt about the challenge of working on Simpsons, your favorite aspects of working on the Simpsons as well.
I mean, Simpsons in many ways was the best professional situation I ever had. It was a very small company. It was a company that treated its artists well and seemed to, we just felt really appreciated all the time. and they planned well, so you usually weren't working down to the wire. You were given the time that you needed to get the things done well, instead of having to rush. I think in my 18 years of working on The Simpsons, I think there were only like 2 times where they're ever like, we need this fast. All the other times they gave me plenty of time to work on the things, and I really greatly appreciated that, because I was able to bring my best work to it. And yeah, it was just, everybody was, as I was talking about, like with freshmen, everyone was so nice. Again, with the Simpsons thing, the whole staff, all the pencilers that I was working with, even the writers, when I would occasionally chat with them, everyone was so nice. And it was just a wonderful working situation. It wasn't stressful, because, like I said, they planned out enough in advance that you almost, like I said, except for with a couple times that I can think of, there was almost never a rush. It was like, oh yeah, you got 3 weeks to do this, and it's like, oh, wonderful, So, and they had so many good pencilers with a variety of styles. I mean, because they had some flexibility. Earlier on, things had to be more dead on the Simpsons style guide, but as time went on, they got looser about what was acceptable for the Simpsons comics. And so there could be some, there was a variety of styles. And in fact, even in the inks, there were a variety of inks. When I first was trying to do it, it had to be much more the Simpsons style guide, that sort of that thin, that kind of line that, that Matt would use. And, there was an issue that they had me do, that was, did we already talk about the Karl Barks homage thing last time?
I don't think so.
Okay. Just making sure before I start rambling on about a story that we've already done. Okay. So if we didn't talk about Karl Barks, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Back when Karl Barks was still alive, this would have been late 90s, I'm guessing. At like age 101, Karl came up with some new project that he wanted to do, but he couldn't draw it anymore. And the test, now you know who Karl Barks is, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Just making sure, because not everybody does.
He's the good duck. He's the good duck artist.
He's the good duck artist. Yes, he is considered the greatest of the duck artists. He created Uncle Scrooge and Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and most of DuckTales is based on his comics. And so he's one of the great legends that maybe isn't as well known as he should be here in the U.S. Anyway, so what company? It wasn't Fantagraphics. It was Kitchen Sink.
It Gemstone.
It was Kitchen Sink.
Okay.
Kitchen Sink. And so, I got a call asking me if I wanted to do a sample for it. And the sample was draw the ducks. And if Karl likes your ducks, you're in. And apparently of everyone who tried out, Karl liked my ducks the best. And so I was going to get to work on whatever this thing was. But unfortunately for all of us, Karl made it to 102, but he passed away before this project could ever happen. And so I didn't get to do that. But the fact that Karl liked my ducks apparently stuck with me, and it's been one of those things that people have, it's gotten around various people here and there, and has led to me doing various jobs over the years, including them calling me and saying, hey, we've got this issue of The Simpsons we're doing that's an homage to Karl Barks' Uncle Scrooge comics. Would you, could you ink this? And doing it, I could do a much lusher style than I had been doing on some of the earlier things I've been doing for The Simpsons, because they, especially when they were doing an homage issue, they would allow much more flexibility with the inking. And so I did this issue that way. And apparently, from what I've been told, Matt Groening popped into the office one day and saw my pages for this sitting there and was like, "Oh, these are really nice." And apparently, the staff had been trying to convince Matt for a while to let them do much more brush inking on the Simpsons books. And they were like, "Well, if you like this, see, this was all done with brush. Can we can we do more brush inking? And that was what apparently convinced Matt to be like, okay, you can start doing brush inking. So not just for me, but for the other inkers too. We all got to start using brushes as opposed to doing more pen work, which is what we've been doing typically before that. And, so I had a point with this, but I'm not quite sure where I was going. I can tell you that still stands out as one of my favorite Simpsons stories. So that may have been the point I was trying to get to, but I'm not sure. But but yes, that's still, I still am very, very proud of that in particular, that issue. That was the homage to Carl Barks Duck Comics. But yeah, I mean, I just had a great time working on it. Because, you know, they did have a lot of flexibility in the styles, and I got to work with all these, you know, great pencilers. And you know, what, like there was, you know, they sent, like, if you look up these guys, you had like James Lloyd, who was doing almost like, you know, what if Jeff Darrow was drawing the Simpsons comics, you know, or you had, John Delaney, whose stuff was so, like, you know, like very, a distortion on the basic style guide, but so lively, and just such great action to his stuff, and a lot of fun Kirby lines here and there, you know, and it was just a great time working on those things. I loved working on them, and I loved working for them, and I was, you know, and again, was really, really sorry to see that go. I fortunately was able to come back in and do the final issue, because I had actually stopped working on them a little bit when I got that Dinosaurs project I mentioned. And you know, was busy penciling and inking that, and I got a call from both the editor, director, who neither of them would tell me why they wanted me to come back, but both said I can do one issue. And I suspected it could be because it was the end, and sure enough, they told me after the fact that yes, it was the final issue of The Simpsons. So I'm glad I got to come back, and I got to do the very final Simpsons comic book over penciler Rex Lindsay, who was, you know, tying it all back into Archie, was one of the great Archie artists who I had really liked working with and had actually introduced to the Simpsons guys.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, they wanted some people they needed some extra pencilers on Simpsons. And I was like, there's this Rex Lindsay guy, you know, and yeah, I never got to work with Rex over at Archie, though I own several of his originals. You know, it's like, as far as the modern Archie artists go, he's one of my favorites. And I own actually not just a couple of originals. I own a complete issue of World of Archie penciled and inked by him, because there was one that I particularly loved, and he still had it. I bought the entire issue off him. But yeah, so penciler Rex Lindsay, you know, we never got to work at Archie, but we got to do a few Simpsons things together, including the very final issue. And I was really sorry to see that go, because again, not only was it just the money, but on that one, it was so fun for so many years. I was on that book for 18 years.
It's incredible. What a duration, right? I mean, that doesn't happen often.
Right. I mean, it's not like I was on every single one, but from I did my very first job for them in 2000, and my last job for them in 2018. So it's a long time.
I'm going to ask you one final question before I let you get back to your evening. I know you have other things that you could and should probably be doing, but in 2015, I believe you did a variant cover to Donald Duck #2. I'm curious who gave you the call, and what was it like to be able to contribute a cover like that?
It was actually the first issue of Uncle Scrooge when IDW relaunched it. Again, it was one of those things where the editor had heard that Carl Barks had liked my ducks, which, like I said, led to the Simpsons things. It also led to me inking, you know, even like in between, like a few years even before the IDW thing. I had gotten to ink a Carl Barks penciled cover that Carl had never finished. And they, you know, got a call from Gemstone asking me to do the inks on that. So that was thrilling that I got to ink Carl Barks himself on something. But yeah, IDW had heard that, you know, Barks had liked my ducks, and so they called me up and wanted me to do a variant cover for several of the books. Without getting into the long story of why that didn't end up happening, I'll just say yes. I got to pencil and ink one cover for the first issue of Uncle Scrooge, and I still have the original for that. That's one of those things that I was just very excited. Like, when else am I going to get to do this? And so I was very happy to get to do that. I still have the original. I've had people ask to buy that original off me. And sure, maybe when I'm 80 years old and I'm like, okay, I've had it long enough, I'll sell it. But at this point, I'm still happy to, I don't keep a whole lot of my originals. But that one I did, because it was like, I got to, pencil and ink an Uncle Scrooge cover. And I love those old Barks comics. So for me, it was a fun thing to get to do. And I got to work with, colorist, Paul Mounts on that one. And again, I didn't get to work with Paul a lot. Paul I met back when I met Tony Akins back when I was still in college. And so, it was always great when I had the opportunity to work with Paul. And so yeah, I wish there'd been more, but unfortunately that was the only one that ever got finished for that. And I will mention.
Too bad, but I mean, at least got to do it.
Yeah. So I sure hope someday there's a way to do some more. I keep hoping that somebody else hears, Mark's liked Andrew's ducks. Let's hire him for this. So it could still happen. You never know. There was somebody else who heard the same thing. There was somebody else who heard the same thing and tried to start a duck kind of comic, but it wasn't Donald, and that didn't pan out. But hey, it could still happen. And I will mention one other little project that sort of happened. That the Simpson people all liked each other so much that we still will find ways to work together on things, even when it's not the Simpsons. So Bill Morrison and Tone Rodriguez and Nathan Kane and Serban Critiscu and I all did the Beatles' Yellow Submarine movie adaptation. I don't know if you saw that. That came out also.
I did. No.
Yeah. It was a hardcover book. Came out from Titan in 2018 and was later, and it was actually just recently re-released by Insight Books. And we did the official 50th anniversary movie adaptation because we really liked working with each other, and we really liked each other as people, and we all ended up so it's sort of like Bill had actually been trying to do it on his own years earlier, and I can't remember what went wrong with the project at the time, but never got finished. And then when he finally 20 years later got the okay to finish it, it had to be finished quickly. And so he brought, so he brought a bunch of us, other Simpsons people in to help finish it up. And I know that Paul and Ringo themselves had to sign off on this. So I will always take as a point of pride that, that obviously it got approved and got published. So that kind of means, at least for me, Paul and Ringo like my stuff. So, So that's one of those very cool kind of things where it's like, okay, I'll never get to meet them, but they looked at my comics, So I'll always.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me again. This was a real blast, and really exciting to kind of hear your stories. And you've worked on so many amazing projects over the years, so it's really cool to be able to hear your unique insights. So thank you so much for joining me again.
Right, and before we go, let me give a plug for what I'm working on now, just because I just want to tell everyone to go to my website, pepoy.com, pepoy.com, and check out what I'm doing. You can sign up for my newsletter, which will tell you what various different things I'm doing, but hopefully it'll especially also tell you at the website about my Simone and Ajax comic, which we didn't really talk much about, which is something I've also been working on for the last 30-some years. But I have some new books out. Yeah, I have some new books out with them, and you can just go to the website and click the Buy Books button if you want to. But you can also just go to the link from pepoy.com to the Simone and Ajax site, where you can read free previews of some of the new stories that I've been doing with them. Where this is my own creator-owned book where I'm writing and drawing it, and in this case, in this recent edition of them, I am also self-publishing them. So I have to tell everyone, please go to my website and buy my book, because I'm publishing it myself now, and I'm trying to make a go of this. So I hope you'll like it. It's a very, if you're looking for anything deep and meaningful, this is not it. But if you're looking for a fun comic, partially inspired in some ways by those great Duck adventures and some of the other great classic adventure strips, but with a lot more, but with a lot of silly jokes and just cheesy puns, you might have a lot of fun with this one. So check it out, Girl and Her Dinosaur, having ridiculous adventures in the Old West and Transylvania and all sorts of other things. So again, Pepoy, PEPOY.com, and you can find all the links you need for everything else there. So thank you for checking that out, everybody.
Absolutely. And actually, if people want to check out if they haven't already, checked out the first half of our discussion back on episode 1068. We also did talk about your creator-owned work on there as well at the back half of that episode. So, there's more discussion of this stuff as well. Absolutely.
Great. I'm glad you remembered that.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun chatting with you about your work, and I really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you.